Today is Tuesday, March 6th, 2018. This is Stephen Palmer, and I am here with Martin Boyce, who came up from downtown, and we are in my apartment in Washington Heights. And we're going to talk about Stonewall, talk about the time, and just some rapid fire questions, Martin. Where were you born?
In the Greenwich Village, actually, St. Vincent's Hospital.
What year?
48.
1948, okay. And where did you grow up?
In Turtle Bay, East 40s.
In the East 40s, okay.
And it was great to be born. To be raised there was a great thing.
Mom, dad, brothers, sisters?
Oh, I had them. But I'm 70 now. I think I lost them.
Okay, all right. So let's move right into talking about what we're going to talk about. And why don't we start out sort of in the middle somewhere, and tell me about when you first realized you were gay.
Well, I always knew. The problem was how to keep adjusting as time kept moving on. And I was getting closer and closer to puberty, which I knew something was going to happen. And because I wouldn't have the handicap of being interested sometimes in girls' things, that a pubescent boy would never, So it was going to become a problem. It was a problem, too.
What do you mean interested in girls' things?
Well, the idea we feel your puberty, you could take girls in roles sometimes in street plays and things. And no one was questioning you about your testosterone or anything, which changes after 12, And then all of a sudden it becomes a real issue.
Okay. How about your first attractions to men?
Well, they were always there. Always.
Anybody in particular?
The laundryman, this guy Joe. This was the 1950s, with these guys with beautiful cars, looking as testosteronically sexy as possible. There was all this titillation in the 50s. A child could feel it if they were aware. And being born in an Italian household where sexuality wasn't the biggest issue, there was a leniency to the whole thing and a good understanding of what all these problems were. So, things weren't hidden. Plus, my father was a taxi driver, and since the 1930s. And he had his own cab. And from him, I learned a lot of what's going on in the streets, like where the gays hang out.
Where did the gays hang out?
The Village was the big thing for him. Mm-hmm. He sort of indicated, that the Village was a place where it's partially theirs,
What did he have to say about that? Do you remember his feeling about the gays?
No, he never said anything. It was another group of people. The only warnings we received was, and usually from my father, was when a group of kids were going to go to the West Side, to the movie houses. And then my father would step in, and he would explain to us there's certain kinds of men who go for kids, so stick together. But he never said they, and they were all the kind of guy. He was very liberal like that, my father, without being philosophical.
Do you think your father knew that you were gay?
Well, he should have.
What would have given it away?
Oh, well, one time, I loved Indians and toys. And my father, they gave me the most beautiful set of painted steel Indians or iron Indians. And I was delighted until my sister opened her gift, which was a dollhouse. And I wept, and I wept. It went to the next day. And my grandmother, very Sicilian, was starting to go crazy to see me weep like that. So my father, wanted to stop. And he gave me, I think it was a lot of money at the time, to get something. He said, whatever you want, maybe it was a 20, Just get it, but stop it. Well, we went, and I got this big chuck wagon. My father hit a sigh of relief. He saw the big chuck wagon. I took it home, and then I filled it with my sister's doll furniture and put a little string on it and a mobile home. And my father just said, I give up. So,
He wasn't heavily disciplinarian with
no,
you?
not at all.
Loving guy?
My mother was an invalid, so there was a lot of adjustments to be made. I mean, us kids did a lot of things. I mean, I wouldn't have put it that way then. But I think in my father's mind, as a judgment, we did so much, you know, at a very early age, even let him going out to work and we would take care of the house. And so I thought we should get something back, he thought, and let us grow. Since we weren't bad, so the things we chose were never bad for him. The direction we were going wasn't really a bad thing.
Let me ask you another question real quick. Are those lines comfortable on your arm like that, or maybe I should just...
No, that's fine.
Should I put them under? Here, put your...
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
is this all being recorded?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm looking at not you, not the camera, right? I'm supposed to.
Yep. No, you're doing great.
Okay.
So you talked about your father essentially saying he gave up. Do you remember your first sex with a boy?
You know what? I'm ashamed to say no, because it was a whole group of boys. And I can't remember who was first.
Were they other boys your age? Were they gay boys, or was this just some boy play that used to happen?
Well, boy play, because these were like, and usually they were a little older, which I looked up to them, you know. And some of them very, very tough boys, hood boys. Oh, hood boys always.
Where would these sexual experiences take place?
Oh, they always knew something. Because we were living in a commercial district, there were so many little spots and so many things they knew. Alleyways and secret shortcuts through buildings. I knew some of them myself, but they had a darker mind.
This is Turtle Bay?
Yes.
Interesting.
Tudor City.
Tudor City. If you were to, would you mind if you'd like, because I'd like to get a sense of what those environments look like. If you were to close your eyes and try and evoke a scene where those would happen, elevator or what have you, the smells, the sights.
Well, Tudor City had a lot of, since it was built like in the 20s, a lot of these strange staircases you find in New York that you can't really, especially as a kid, you can't connect to why. Unused, with the fire hose about an inch dust on it, inch of dust. I mean, really unused, with usually a red light and a pre-sexual atmosphere, an ambiance, a male's world, you know, a world of butchness and not abstractions, but simple geometries, no decorations, you know. It's very interesting places and different kinds of places, alleyways, sometimes cellars that were open and available. Well, you see, understand that most of the people, there was Tudor City, and there was another section, which was more the working class section, which I lived in. And Dad had people that lived for 30 years in that area. So whenever you found a spot, it had to be a good one because there were so many eyes. I mean, at the time, in the 50s, in New York City, on 43rd and 2nd Avenue, you could leave your bike outside the store unguarded. That's how many people lived in that neighborhood that long. Nothing could happen. They were neighborhoods, not communities, you know. But they were warm.
And how old are you when you start having these experiences with these hoodie boys?
Oh, must have been 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old.
Mm-hmm. So early on.
Because there were certain boys we admired. There was something called a JD card. And the city gave it out if you were a juvenile delinquent. If you were caught doing bad things, burglaries, whatever they want to call it. And the city didn't start to realize there was already the counterculture moving. And the JD cards were supposed to punish you, but they became emblems. Because this was the age of the wild ones and lost causes and people without causes. So, I mean, these were like, the JD kids were the most sexy. They were like the Brandos of the neighborhood. And they meant to look it. So, I mean, this is the kind of culture it was at the time.
Talk to me about finding your way down to Greenwich Village when that started happening.
Well, I first found my way into the Rambles.
Talk about the Rambles.
And I saw this guy who was...
Tell the crowd where the Rambles are.
Oh, the Rambles are like in Central Park, the West 70s, the wooded area. It's very changed. But I would walk home from school. I went to school on 54th Street, and I would cut through the park to my neighborhood, which we finally lived in Yorkville. And one day there was this guy who was very interesting and kept looking back. And I was young and nervous, but I did follow him at a good distance. There was hardly any of the park, I could see him. And he went into this area that was wooded and it was just gay. Couldn't believe it.
How did you know it was gay?
Oh, there was only men in there, and it took a second to know. I mean, what were they all in the bushes for? I mean,
What did you see?
I saw what I expected, but I still thought it was brazen. I mean, it was brazen, but the great thing for me was, like, I didn't officially come out to my father yet, and he drove a cab. So it was very dangerous to see me running around with the crowd. But there were no eyes on me. So, but I heard all about the village. I mean, it was like being, in New Jersey. Like, the Rambles was New Jersey compared to the village of New York. And, I heard through the whole summer of '66 that this was great. And I knew from my father earlier. So eventually I got down there. Because we did go down there like in the early '60s with my sister. She was a beatnik. And beatniks were the first kind of people I ever met, even with the gay issue. I mean, they really tried to understand. But nobody at the time could even ask you, even if they were a good friend, were you gay? They just couldn't ask that. You didn't ask a man that. It was unfair, below the belt, and just rude. So like the beatniks would try to get you drunk a little and then say you're free to answer what you want to say. But you never answered that question.
So even within the beatnik movement, it wasn't as open yet, you felt, to homosexuality?
No, they would have been open. You had to open.
I see.
That was the problem. They couldn't say to you, are you gay? Because that means they assumed all this time you were.
Your sister, what was her name?
Beverly.
Beverly. And Beverly was into the beatnik movement?
Well, my sister was completely liberated on her own. And she certainly encouraged everything I did. Since she found it as a protest. We did find it as an early protest. We had no movement yet. But all over, I think, the country, there were young people like us that were had it. The propaganda, the cruelty, after seeing all that Birmingham stuff. I mean, we just couldn't go on the way we were with all this propaganda and new layers of propaganda, like Doris Day films, I mean, I love Doris Day films, but they were propaganda, There was going to be one class in America, it was going to be middle class, and the thing was set. Language changed in movies. And I was always an integrationist, I always thought all people should get along. Because my neighborhood, that's the way it was. It was the middle class, working class, but we interacted. It was a wonderful way to learn for both groups.
You graduated high school in '66?
No, 66, right?
Okay. And where were you living at that point?
That was Yorkville.
Okay. So talk to me about coming into the village. Did you come with friends? Who were your friends? Where would you go? What would you do?
Oh, well, phase one was not gay. That was the early 60s with my sister. Bleecker Street, McDougal Street, none of the gay things. I didn't even ask because you weren't supposed to ask. I figured I'd find out on my own, but I did know there was an activity. But after being in Rambles, I went straight to Christopher Street. And in one night made friends. And it was great. It was like an amazing group of people that you did what they pleased. It was like South Park before there was South Park. And something would happen every night that was amazing.
I'm sorry, you said it was like
South Park.
South Park.
Yeah, the comics.
Okay.
You know.
The cartoon.
Right, because they would get into these things that were just exciting and adventurous. And nothing stopped them. And they had no shame. It was the first gay people that I ever saw had no shame. Not that that was always good, but it was amazing.
How was that communicated to you? What did you notice that showed that they had no shame?
Well, their attitude, they just didn't have a problem. I mean, they just had an attitude that they were okay. Each individual one was okay. I mean, maybe everybody else was screwed up, but they were okay. And that was a whole group of people thinking individually they were okay. And, you know, shame was never the... Truth was more of a matter. You're gay, you know. But shame was never a matter. That's why they were so proud and would go on the subways into the ghetto neighborhoods even and be so proud like that, which I would have tried to hide it. I would like shade into a hippie thing until I got to the village. Not these queens. Not at all.
What did you mean shade into a hippie?
Well, you know, if I was going home, and the city was very different then. It was like a film noir city with a larger proportion of proletariat guys and racial mixing, well, ethnic and racial problems. Not racist problems, but racial problems. Mainly the idea of turf. It was an age of turf. It was the last hurrah of turf. And you know from West Side Story what that means. It means that, you know, you weren't supposed to go to other people's neighborhoods. I used to look at the UN and say, where's peace? Because, you know, there were so many gangs at the time. My neighborhood didn't have one. So you had to traverse this turf, you know. And now I lost sight of the question.
That's okay. We're talking about, well, actually, I forgot the actual question too.
Because we went to a
No, that's
tangent.
fine. Because I liked where you were going anyway. But
They had no shame.
It had to do with you shading it with hippie. Like,
Oh, right. So on the way home, I could easily blend into a hippie. Because, I never wore really outrageous outfits. I wore outfits that I could adjust. I was always conscious of how I was going to get home.
So in the village on Christopher Street, it would seem more flamboyant.
Yes.
And you'd be able to adjust it to just seem hippie.
Right.
That's interesting. What did that look like? What kind of
Well, instead of having the shirt down, when I got to the village, I would tie it. I mean, for my sister, I knew there was these tricks.
It's great.
And when I got home, it was close to a wrinkled mess, but what did it matter? You were coming home 4 a.m.
Did your parents think you were a hippie?
They didn't ask. No, they knew I was gay even, much earlier because all of my sister's gay friends would come visit. And we had a camaraderie with me, all of them. But everybody was kind. Like I said, even a gay person couldn't say, "Are you gay?"
That was the ironclad.
It just wasn't said. That's how bad things were, psychologically.
And when you're on Christopher Street, was that still the truth, or was that a weird?
No, Christopher Street was our turf. That was our block. It was the only block you didn't have to turn around to look who's behind you. You didn't have to look a block ahead of you to see if any trouble was coming. Because we had to learn a lot of things. We had to learn how people walked and see that from a block away. And if you saw three guys walking very toughly, it meant something. Either you had a chance to be close to the other side of the block and go around again, or take your chances. But not on Christopher Street.
What would happen if tough guys came up? Would the gays band together, or?
The occasions usually didn't occur. Mainly because I think there's always safety in numbers, because the other side can be intimidated as to if they're going to get away, However, I was attacked on Greenwich Avenue by a bunch of college boys from Miami. But that wasn't too bad.
What year was that?
That was 67. I mean, they came out of nowhere.
And you were gay bashed?
Yeah. Well, like 6 or 7 of us. But it was only one shot deal.
Let me put this on hold for a second. Our other fellow is here. All right. So now you're looking this way. So we're in Greenwich Village. We're on Christopher Street. It's a whole different group of people. They're out. They're gay. Oh, I don't know. Is out a word yet in 1966 and 67?
Yes. Just said, did he come out? Yeah.
Okay. All right. And when you were there, you would be a bit more flamboyant, and then you'd be able, when you went home, to change the acclimate the clothing you had to have it just look hippie instead of gay. Did you consider yourself a part of the counterculture? Did you consider yourself hippie also at the time?
Well, yes, but I didn't. It was a straight movement to me, hippieism. I mean, there were gay hippies that developed, but it really wasn't a gay thing yet. It had its gay part, but the emphasis of what they were doing wasn't really gay. We had our own sensibility.
Do you think there was anything about the openness of the hippie movement that helped the gay movement?
Well, everything helped that involved the sexual revolution because it was sexual. However, they weren't very nice to gays, the hippie.
Do you remember some experiences?
Oh, many experiences. Because, they were long-haired guys that were very conscious of their masculinity and their testosteronic level and things like that. They couldn't seem to be soft, intellectual, emotional in the historical manner, but not soft. Because these, people like that are usually could be condemned for being gay themselves, and they had to emphasize their butchness.
Interesting.
Though they could be very friendly, but not coming together in a handshake over our civil rights. They were tolerant. It was an age of tolerance. But tolerance, when you examine it, is not a very good word in regard to human rights.
Right.
Yeah, because I remember I was with this little black girl at a party once, and she was a very interesting girl. She wasn't really very educated at everything by standards, but she was at the punch bowl, and this woman was talking to her in a certain way, and she said, "Now listen, lady, I ain't gonna let you tolerate me." And toleration was the word in the papers, the word in the liberals. And, it wasn't a good word. She was the first one to make you realize it's not such a good word. So tolerance was what we got.
What was the punch bowl?
Oh, we were having punch. Bowl.
Where was that?
At a party, a very sophisticated party. Because there was a lot of sophisticated parties in the 60s. And wealthy people opened their houses to a lot of parties with a real democratic list of guests or invitations. It was nice. That was interesting.
Were you involved in other civil rights? Were you involved in protests?
Oh, yes, anti-war, and also stuffing envelopes for the NAACP. I mean, because I was raised a block away from the UN, so I was very conscious of the world and the global implications of our position in America, I was very embarrassed when I saw those things on TV that I knew Europeans were watching this, other people were watching this, and how awful. And who let these people get away with such laws? I mean, it was one shock after another. I had no idea that in some states, a black person and a white person couldn't marry. As late as like 1965 or 7, I don't remember what it was. It was shock, one shock after another.
So you were politically minded, and you partook in anti-war demonstrations.
Oh, yes.
Were you part of a gay contingent in anti-war demonstrations?
No.
Just
I don't know. I never saw a gay contingent. There may have been, but I never saw one. It certainly wasn't ever discussed. There was one down 2nd Avenue that was very interesting. I looked out the window and there was a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but 6 or 7 Puerto Rican drag queens against the war. But people thought this was outrageous and belittled the group. People didn't think that this was interesting.
people within the anti-war?
Within the neighborhood.
The
neighborhood, as they marched through our neighborhood. It didn't do anything for them because they had drag queens in there. It didn't make them more interesting. It just made them foolish.
So it was 6 or 7 Puerto Rican drag queens by themselves
With the banner.
protesting the war.
Yeah, it was the first time I saw that. And people didn't react very well to that.
What was your response?
I was amazed. I thought these queens are amazing. This is camp. I love anything outrageous. And juxtaposed with the situation they were in, it was very outrageous. But then from them I had learned that, the treatment of gays is different in different cultures. This was, a great liberation for me, seeing the different cultures in New York. Because when I would go to Puerto Rican neighborhoods, I knew Puerto Ricans, the drag queens would be out in the street taking care of the kids with big rollers in their heads and their eyes plucked. And nobody, these are tough neighborhoods, nobody would touch them. So there was a toleration for that type of homosexuality, the feminine type, which we had no toleration amongst the Anglos at all. There was no exceptions. Money could bring an exception, that's it. Because in my neighborhood, there was a gay, rich guy and a poor, or not poor, but working class gay guy, both named Freddie. And the rich one was called Freddie the Fruit.
Freddie the Fruit?
Right. And the poorer one was called Freddie the Fag. I mean, right there. And boys were allowed to go to Freddie the Fruit's apartment because he had a stamp collection. Amazing. The other side of life was so amazing to me. That's why I joined this crusade of the night, I loved film noir, I loved pulp, I loved all these things, and they were there, they were out there. I just couldn't wait to get out there. My father had already indicated it was all out there.
You said you loved film?
Film noir,
Film noir.
And this was a noirish city with the lights were much lower. And there weren't lights in front of every doorway. That came much later. So here you had this city of the night that was incredible, with all of the desires and longings from 3 states situated here. The boys from New Jersey. We could go to the Port Authority and watch them come in, the refugees, the gay refugees. It's incredible. Their hopes, their delight over a cup of coffee. If you had some extra money, you'd do that. And talking to a real New Yorker, their future, they could see in their eyes. Yeah, it was an amazing city, amazing. And that's why what happened.
Well, let's situate ourselves in Greenwich Village. We spoke about Christopher Street. Talk to me about the bars you went to, and we'll get to your relationship to the Stonewall?
Yeah, well, the bars, none of them was significant. There was one place that didn't serve liquor that I did like, the 10th of Always. It was...
The 10th of Always.
Yes, and they had dancing, but they didn't serve liquor. And it was all art. It was all created. They had little French tables, small French cafe tables, and on a platform. And it was all done. It was all done by hand. It was a very interesting place. I liked the aesthetics and the atmosphere that those aesthetics created. Things hand done, you know. But that was not a dance. But nonetheless, dancing one night, the red light did come on and off, on and off, on, and everybody went for the seats. And in comes 3 detectives, one of them looking like Orson Welles in Touch of Evil. I couldn't believe it. The cigar, the face that fat, the slouch hat. And he went over to every one of us and looked at us like this with the cigar. What an ugly close-up. And making believe that he was going to remember us. See, we were in trouble. And he was going to remember us. When he saw us again, we were going to be in trouble. Which we knew was stupid, but it was still intimidating to see that face, and he had the power. And my father used to call those detectives in the old days bulls, and you could see why they got that name.
Talk a little bit about the red light going on and off. What did that signify?
It signified the police were on their way or in. It meant get to your table.
And there wasn't dancing there, but
There was dancing because
there
there wasn't liquor.
okay. So it was stop dancing or stop dancing
Yeah,
with each other.
You know, stop dancing. It was the best thing to do was stop dancing. I mean, because, you know, you really still weren't supposed to dance. I'm sure they didn't have a license to dance, but they had a dance floor, and they weren't serving drinks. So you know, you got away with what you got away with.
What kind of music was on the jukebox?
Oh, it was great. It was a great jukebox, like Stonewall's jukebox. Great.
What was on Stonewall's jukebox?
Oh, Stonewall's jukebox. Well, that's another story. Because Stonewall's jukebox was a very important piece of equipment. It was not just a jukebox. Here's where the Black Queens hung out. And they controlled that jukebox. Like in the old days, people would control access to the phone in jail. I mean, you better play good music, or otherwise you're not going to get to the jukebox again. Because that's where they vogued, because all the lights were there. Drag queens know exactly where the center of things are, you know, because they know how to distract. They really know things. And they knew that that was the place which to vogue and to control.
Did they control it in a way that other people wouldn't be allowed to go to it?
They only controlled in the sense if you played really music that was going to bug everybody out, you weren't going to get back to that jukebox.
What kind of music would bug everybody out?
Well, I did it once.
Who did you put on?
I made the mistake of putting on, Leaving on a Jet Plane.
Peter, Paul, and Mary?
Yes. And I was allowed to the jukebox to always play good music. It took all my allowance money, anybody I could gather, just to get those queens drinks so I could get back to the jukebox. It was fun.
So the Black Queens didn't like Peter, Paul, and Mary?
They didn't want that stuff.
What was the predominant music? What was
Soul.
Soul music.
Oh, yeah. Because they would answer each other, these queens, on the jukebox. Someone would say something to someone, and the queen would drop a quarter in and get the answer to her. Like, you know, you think you're real? And drop the thing, and there ain't nothing like the real thing, babe. And then go. And this would go on. So the jukebox was really, this was electric. I mean, this was not static.
That's great.
That's why the bar was great. I mean, it's these little things. Because we were only one of our group. There were so many groups. Because there was only one place where you could dance. I mean, I said before that it was like the watering hole on the savannah, where all the animals had to go, and it was. Crocodiles as well as their enemies. But made a great bar.
So Stonewall was your favorite watering hole?
I liked the scene. I didn't like the drinks. I didn't like the attitude. I didn't like the mafia. But, we were grateful for anything.
What was the attitude of Stonewall?
Well, there were the gay guys in suits, the regular gays. And you had to walk a gauntlet if you went down the bar. And that was a gauntlet of really nasty, sometimes remarks and disgust.
By the fellows in suits?
Yes, because we're giving gays a bad name. Not all gays are like that, but society identified all gays as that. And these guys resented. They had a real resentment. It wasn't, gays didn't have that much sympathy for each other.
Did anybody ever insult you?
Not necessarily, but I was always friendly with everybody, and they would like to talk to me once in a while, but only for a minute or two. I was expected to move on. We could always ask each other a nice little thing. Not at the bar with their friends. These guys had sweaters, they had jobs, they had to worry about keeping those jobs. They had an identity crisis. There wasn't much about homosexuality. It was those multi-sexualities, But they resented it, that the feminine thing was the center of it, that we were all that, I did not identify with being a drag queen. I was scared drag queen or flame queen. I did it for protest. It was not my identity.
What was your identity?
Well, I felt like a queen, but not, I wasn't ideological about it, I wasn't overly concerned about it. I didn't just want to get out of the house. I wouldn't spend time in front of the mirror. I always found an outfit or a look that would serve well all night, I know it was no curiosity to wear high heels because I couldn't run. No, I was very practical. The queen next door that was the type.
Say that again?
The queen next door,
The queen next door. Okay.
I was civil. Not at night when I was in the village. That's when I was free.
So now it's the summer of 1969, and we're coming in June 28th. I think that was the day Judy Garland was put to rest up at St. Patrick's Cathedral, or was it?
She was laid out for about 3 days at Campbell's on 81st and Madison. I went.
Oh, you did?
Oh, I did go. Yeah, I did go. I thought I should, She was not only a gay hero, she was a working class hero, She was the people's hero, Because my father had a cab, I knew some of the great events was like, her at Carnegie Hall and her at the Palace. My father, there was an excitement. My father talked about the excitement to go and see her, And then the rainbow and all that. She was part of us.
Did you go with other gay friends to Judy Garland's wake?
Yes, there was Birdie. A few of the Stonewall people were there. Opera George was there.
Opera George?
Yeah. And it was a live, it was mostly queens and gays, and a lot of working class people, women, like with stacks of Camels cigarettes under their arms, wearing house dresses with the jiggly arms, devoted to Judy, devoted. And denouncing us as gay people, that we're not devoted as much as she was, this woman was saying.
You had somebody saying that to you?
Someone did say that to me. What do you fairies know? What do you know about Judy? It was pathetic. Look, she knew everything,
What did you answer back?
Nothing. She was so pathetic, nobody answered her at all. It's like, that's what she thinks. These gays weren't tolerant themselves. The queens couldn't care less. She wasn't insulting us. Fairies wasn't a bad word to use. She'd say faggot. She was rather nice. But there was no words to use for us. No kind words.
So, after the wake, you went down to...
No, I went to the work about Wednesday or Thursday. I never connected the Stonewall to Judy at all.
Okay.
Never,
that's famously done, right?
It is done, and it may be true for some people. There were enough gays on the line, but it wasn't for me, and I never heard even Bertie say that, or the people I knew.
Who's Birdie?
Bertie was my best friend, and we were platonic friendship we had. We were inseparable. We fought together at Stonewall.
So, Stonewall happened on a Saturday night?
I think it was a Friday night.
Friday night? Okay, June 28th. So tell me what was going on that evening, what you were doing, what happened.
Oh, well, let me just preface it with, it was an election year, and the police brutality, now since 1966 I was in the village, had gotten to a point where everybody knew someone who had experienced a problem or themselves experienced a problem, and some really horrible incidents. And it got to be, we knew more and more. It was getting to be a bit much. It was like everybody knew someone, so everybody felt this threat and how to combat this threat. You know, we did have ways. You know, there was a whole bit of knowledge out there to find out who's a policeman, you know. Some of them worked and some didn't. But there was a myth about how to do it, so it was that important. But it really got to be a bit much. I mean, it was like, it was getting on everybody's nerves. And gays had changed. You know, in the 50s, they were non-existent unless you could read the signs. You know, the airline bag, the tennis sneakers. But in the 60s, that wasn't so anymore. Stonewall couldn't have happened in the 50s. But in the 60s, there was a strength of like realization by some different gay people of our effect on Broadway, effect on style. Truman Capote was out on television. I mean, in the 50s, they had nobody out. We did have a group of icons that were out. And that helped, and they were on television. And even if they were negatively in cinema, they were there. Because when you're oppressed, you just want to see yourself negative or not. Just want to see a reflection.
I love that idea. When you're oppressed, it doesn't matter if you're seen negatively or not. You just want to be seen.
That's all. And that's why I went in Scared Drag, because we would do, there were loops in the law, you know. We did these early zaps that we didn't have the word. And about 10 of us would go to Macy's. And on the makeup counter, which you could try the makeup on, it never said male or female. It was just custom. And we started putting the makeup on. This caused pandemonium in the store. Should they call the police? They did call security. What did security do? What we were doing wrong? The police had to come. We knew, we went peaceably, but we knew we wrecked it. And I remember applying this red lipstick and the world changed. All the space around me changed with a slash of red. I thought it was amazing. And I loved doing these things, zapping. We used to call it plucking nerves. And we would like, 12 of us now go to the Met and dress outrageous. And no one looked at those paintings, you know. But it was very brutal. I remember one time I was going to the Met and I had an Isadora Duncan scarf on, 6 feet of scarf, wrapped around. It was summer. A clutch bag, tube top. As I'm going to up 86th Street, the cops were taking down these parade things. And one of them said to me, "Oh." And I said, "I didn't know you could be like that on the police force." I was joking with him. Well, I got to the Met, 4 blocks down, 4. And all of a sudden, the thing tightened, as if it was in a wheel, like Isadora Duncan. Tightened and threw me on a car. It was him. Turning the scarf, and I was going blue as a Smurf. And he got to my face, I could feel his spit all over me, saying, "Don't you ever speak to a man," he didn't say policeman, "to a man like that. Don't you ever." With all of the people applauding him. All the people going to the Met up the steps. And Bertie, that got on the other car. But Bertie was a camp. Bertie enjoyed it so much the policeman got off him immediately. So, this is what, you know, there was always some humor in it. But I remember having that red neck as if I had been hung. And Bertie said, put the scarf on. I said, I'm not. Let them see. Half of these people out there. So see what their taxes pay for. Oh no, I was like that, you know. How often can you be calm? But I was very good with Bertie, because Bertie was a fighter. Bertie was from the ghetto, and Bertie was a fighter. And many, many times I had stopped Bertie from reacting. And this couldn't have been just one young black Puerto Rican man, you know, it must have been a million times in their minds, in their homes, you know, the anger. That much away from violence. And Bertie could have really taught these people a lesson. There was some opportunities that he would, but I always stopped him because we can't do this every day. We can't fight every day. Until Stonewall, and Bertie had his way.
Go on, Stonewall. What happened?
Okay. All right. So, we were going down to Christopher Street. It was around, I guess for us, around 12. We were going to go to Stonewall, me and Bertie. And we ran into this guy who said, don't bother, you can't get in. He couldn't get in. And we were the same group, so we knew we weren't going to get in. All right. So now we're on a stoop, and we're thinking, what should we do? You know, it's the weekend night. And there was sort of something going on down the block, but it was Christopher Street. But someone behind me said something about a raid. And they were just walking, these regular gays. And I looked at her and I said, Ray. And we went down to see what was happening. So we got there. There was this paddy wagon and this horrible policeman struggling with someone. Couldn't, because of the door, you couldn't see who was struggling with, but I did see the high heel come out and hit him on the shoulder. And he pushed back. But he went back in. There was a lot of banging, and it was bone against metal. Bertie and I winced. But, you know, when these raids come, it started, we were spectators. Every raid, if it was in an area, we would look. Some people glare, they didn't go there that night. Some people seeing their enemies taken away in the Schadenfreude and all sorts of things went on. We were not a people, you know, and we were the spectators. But the drag queens were coming out getting cheers because they would. But there were people coming out whose lives are really in danger now because they had to try to hide their faces because they could lose their jobs. It was all of the ugly, diametrically opposed opinions and things and concepts are all there. You could see it in the, just there. But that cop, you know, when he got that queen in, and I think the riot, for me, in my opinion, started at the same time but in different spots. Because he, when the paddy wagon went, he looked at us, and he was the typical type of cop that oppressed us. He had this disparaging look to us, this disdain, divisive, terrible, ugly, and he was ugly. And he said, all right, you faggots, get the fuck out of here, you saw enough. And he turned, confident, turned around, and he looked to see what was happening over there, because it was happening, things were happening. And for some reason, we each took a step forward, and a step forward, and a step forward. And I could start to see the hairs on his neck. And I saw them go up. And he turned around and was ready to say it again, that nightstick. And all of a sudden, to us, it was like, with Dachau, we're liberated and the tables are turned. There was a consensus, which could be so dangerous, because that consensus gives you the right. And this was man on man right, you know. These were the oppressors. It's been going on for as long as we can remember, and he knew it. He gulped, he blinked, and the riot was on in our section. He went for the bar, and we went. And we started throwing everything we had, you know, pockets, pennies, first as an insult, when we could think, in the early part of the riot. We threw whatever we could, you know, except the keys or anything we needed. We found things to throw. People came up with things. It was amazing. And as the riot was going, it had a certain kind of automatic leadership. You know, it was like hydras. You cut one person down and the next person was up. But it became heroic. It became heroic to me when I saw Miss New Orleans. She's a Southern queen from Miss New Orleans. She was very not attractive, and not healthy looking. But she had this verve. And what she did was ran single-handed to a parking meter and started shaking it till it really started to shake, and then other people knew what she was doing, and they grabbed it. And she led the attack on the doors with that fire hydrant. And I saw her stand up to direct them to where to break the lock, and she was like John Brown. The wind was blowing, her hair was blowing, the heroic face. I haven't seen anything like that of intensity since that painting of John Brown. Was amazed. Another queen thought, what are they doing? Like, what are these people doing? Looked like he was peeing on the door. I said, well, that's one way to protest, you know. But then I saw him turn around and insouciantly light a match and throw it behind him. The door went up. It was lighting fluid. Some people's anger was so calm, it was far more frightening than those who were throwing things. That queen was one of them. She meant harm. I mean, it's amazing. But of course, you don't stand in one place at a riot, you know. Kinetic and kaleidoscopic. You're moving. And incidents happened, and for some reason, it's amazing how you can control that incident. Now, one thing was true. We knew that neighborhood like the Indians, the Iroquois, knew the forest, or the Sioux knew the plains. That's the thing the cops didn't know. We knew every crook and cranny in that village because some guys would take guys to them in hideaways. We knew all the places. And the other thing was, of all things of ironies, all these attacks on us that I knew from 1966 to 69, which I had to plan. If we go to the movies, we could be attacked. If we go here, we could be. We knew how to regroup and meet later, because the attack would scatter you. And that made us very good guerrilla warfare people, urban guerrillas. Because not only we knew the neighborhood, we knew how to meet up without signals. Because gay people know themselves and our habits. And there's two elements of the riot that was extremely important because they couldn't stop the riot. Since we knew where we were going, how to turn around and come back. And we knew how to regroup. So this helped, and it was Bertie's night. Because Bertie told me that, all right, you've always had your way. And bitch, tonight I want to see you fight. I'll be right behind you, she said. It was like being in the Russian army. With Bertie behind me, I was not afraid of the police in front of me because it was worse to have Bertie behind me. It was like Stalin's army. You could get shot from Bertie. And I fought because Bertie was well. And so it actually made me be in the middle of it because that's where Bertie wanted to be, you know. And Bertie was really a fighter, you know, natural born fighter. You know, I mean, I didn't do as much as him, but I had to follow where he went and you know, give that kind of support, which put me into a lot of problems. But in the middle of the riot, the scariest and craziest part of the riot was there's nothing worse in a riot than silence. And all of a sudden it got silent. This roar and the smoke from the burning ash cans and all this damage and there's silence, except for a thump, a constant thump. And then the crowd opened and there they were, the tactical police force, dressed to meet the Black Panthers. I mean, shields, every kind of guard you could imagine. And they were marching straight towards us, like a phalanx of Spartans. However, they came across the band of brothers from Thebes, you know. And we looked at them, didn't know what to do, but we were in the middle, me, Bertie, and Nazimov, and a whole bunch of people. And that's where we grabbed arms and did a kick line. Stunned them. And it gave the gays about 2 minutes grace to think what to do. Are they going to charge? They had to charge because that was their thing, but they were really stunned. They just couldn't believe that this is what they were facing.
What were you singing in the kick line?
We are the village girls. We wear our hair in curls. We wear our dungarees above our Nelly knees. And when it comes to boys, we simply hit, and that's where they can. I know I got hit right in the back, scraped with that's where it ended. I hit my toys.
So that's as far as you got through in the song.
That's as far as I got some. But again, they had to chase us. And again, we came back. And then ammunition came out of everywhere. There was nothing to throw. And of course, our adrenaline caused despair. Here would a queen come in with a huge black bag of orange peels from an orange store. They're making the juice. And she'd open it up, and like miracles, they appeared, these weapons. And we all grabbed her and threw them. And then some other queen would come up with some garbage. I mean, these people were it was like an army of ants. Like they were sent out by chemical and come back, with the things we needed. Each person did their part. And it was beautifully choreographed in a way. They were just beautiful. The dynamics of it. Not only the stormtroopers, which were those Stonewall Queens, they were the stormtroopers of the thing, but many other people were involved too. And it was not an anti-straight riot. It was an anti-police riot. And I saw gays on each side of straight people that were caught in the middle of Christmas Street being guided out. Some women crying, it was frightening. But like you said, we're not after you, lady, we're after the police.
Did any of the businessmen partake in the riot? Did any of the ones that were trying to hide their identity end up just...
Oh, some did. Oh, it was a flood of feeling. Like in the march. There were people that weren't going to join the march. You saw them broke and come to the march, I saw them. And this too. Oh, some of them. There were two black guys. They were great. I think they were straight, but they were huge guys. And they wanted to know what was happening. And one said to the other, "They're fighting police." And he said, "But they're bags, man." He said, "They're still fighting the police." They went in like tanks, just when they were needed. Boom, boom. Oh, stop. Oh, I admire them. That was exciting. I mean,
To have straight black guys fighting.
Yeah, because of human rights, this was...
Because the common thread was...
And it shows that straight people were individuals. They weren't 100% hate. Once we reached out, some people were going to reach back. And you don't know, it wasn't by education, by class, or anything. It was what those men felt in their lives, And that, those two guys really just thought, this was an excuse to fight the police, but still, this was an oppressed group.
You think those two black guys recognized you as an oppressed group?
I think so, because Huey Newton had just said then, I imagined before, that we were the most oppressed people in the world.
I have that...
Look up the date, because I don't know, but so if he said it, there were some people that think like that.
Huey Newton was one of the Black Panthers, and he wrote something that said that the Black Panthers need to recognize the women's movement and the gay movement. And he actually even said that gay people might be the most oppressed people there are. There's a statement. I'm talking to a third person here in the room right now, in case the viewer wants to know. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, so, the riot continued, and it was a matter of just... It seemed that the point for us was to keep it going. And that was the only point. But come near dawn, it was over. It was exhausting. I saw a cop leaning against a fence, and about 5 feet away, some queen exhausted on a stoop. It was like amazing. If we only had cell phones. And dawn started to come, and the whole street was filled with these broken glass that looked like diamonds, just gleamed and glowed. And the wind came, and there were little pieces of cloth from the shops broken, like pieces of lime green tulle floating amongst these diamonds. It was actually one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. But I thought we were going to pay a terrible price. I really did think that. I went home thinking, well, we're going to pay for this.
Okay, all right. Different profile. You were just saying that you thought you were going to, the gay community or gay people?
Gay people.
Because there's not a community.
No.
Are going to pay a terrible price.
Yeah. But within the first week, no. My father, when I got home, said it was about time. Did something.
Your dad? Huh?
Yeah. And he did use the word fags because it was the word you used then, you know. He said, "You fags, about time you did something." And I was,
He knew you were part of it?
oh yeah, then forget it. And, but the most interesting thing I thought was I looked very loud, like, you know, in the daytime going downtown, I didn't mind, you know. There weren't groups around, people looking to beat you up, so I didn't mind being scared rag, even leaving the neighborhood. But you could tell that I wasn't scared rag. And there was this sanitation worker who put down his bag and looked at me, which I was used to, you know, those days and everything. And he put his arm up in a salute. And I said, well, you never know. And I thought that was such a good sign. But the thing that clinched everything was the march, you know. Stonewall was never complete without that march. Because that was the realization of the year of the gains. Because the oppression continued. In August 1970, they did a sweep of 3rd Avenue. They removed everybody. Either they scared everybody away. I don't know how many were arrested. You don't have to arrest many to scare everybody else. But I walked up 3rd Avenue. There was not a gay person on it. And that was a famous cruising spot, old 3rd Avenue. Gone, people, nobody. So, I mean, that was, you know. And the march was interesting because there was a feeling of possible violence in the air. You know, it was the time of Kent State and the hard hats had attacked the hippies and the peace people around that time. It wasn't long after it would be Attica. We knew there was this element of danger. That people had enough, and we don't know when and what they had enough of, you know. But, you know, violence was there. And we were going to do this march, and we called it the first run because we knew it was going to be too easy.
The first run?
The first run.
That's funny.
Right. And I got there, you know, and Washington Square Park, and my imagination was always large. And I couldn't believe how few there were of us. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And then we weren't even given 5th Avenue, a little piece of 6th Avenue. I was so disappointed. And the worst thing about it, just the night before, I'd watched something on National Geographic about wildebeests. And I had noticed it's smarter wildebeests stay in the middle. Because all the ones on the side are getting eaten by crocodiles, the hyenas, and I just thought, you know, there was no middle in the march at the beginning. I mean, I was in terror. I had a Valium on me, I took it, because I didn't know how this was going to go. It was going slowly. There wasn't too much interest in the first few blocks, but that's not the way it went. By every block, there was more curiosity and more curious people. And slightly got bigger, the march, but not something you could be proud of. However, by the time we got to the 40s, that was another story. People were yelling from the windows, some people, but individuals, not cheering, but enough that you don't notice and appreciate. Out of one block, there was this cleaning lady waving her thing, you know what I mean? But meaningful, sincere people. And the most interesting one was this very good-looking guy. He was about on 51st Street and watching like this. He looked like Lonnie, you know, from The Weather. He was striking, a blonde, Tab Hunter-ish, you know, striking kind of guy. You could not help but notice in the crowd. Even if you didn't like that type, couldn't help but notice. And he was struggling with himself. You could see him going like this, and really awful. I couldn't help no. And then he just did it. He went through the police line and joined us. Grabbed 2 people with the arm, marched. It got bigger and bigger. Then all of a sudden, at 57th Street or on 58th Street, the cop said, all right, it's enough, no more. And I said, our first parade, we got a crowd, and they're not letting us through. And so I said, why don't you just let us through? He said, there's too many of you. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Too many of us. This started as single file. In 60 blocks Oh no, the idea of everyone marching from every street through another crowd, behind us and before us. And when I got into Central Park, I saw something that made me really understand for the first time modern dance. On top of this hill was Puerto Rican queen, with long black hair. Turgueña, they say, straight hair with copper color, very beautiful coloring, beautiful hair, doing this modern dance about freedom that I actually understood. I understood every gesture, and everybody understood because there was a big crowd of gay people of all types watching it and speechless because they admired it. And she really just was amazing. She expressed freedom and what we had just gone through. And what started as a question mark in Washington Square Park ended up as an exclamation point in Central Park South. That was a miracle, the miracle of the first parade, I call it.
Where did you end up in Central Park?
South Park, 59th Street?
You didn't go to the Sheep's Meadow?
No. We broke off there. I mean, there was no longer a march, you know.
That's where you just made it into Central Park and you ended.
Right. Some went to the Ramble, you know, because they knew. I mean, you know. But a lot of people didn't plan to march, so they didn't know what to do.
Do you know how many people made it to that march in the end?
I don't know. You could look the figure ups. I would love to know myself. But it was a crowd. I'm talking crowded.
Did you yourself become part of the Gay Liberation Front or the Gay Activist Alliance?
I admired the Gay Activist Alliance. I did not like the GLF. I thought that was a very bad road to go. But, you know, my mother was an invalid. I was still in school. I couldn't give them much time. But I would help with Marty Robinson. But I couldn't do much. Anyway, it didn't seem... The torch was passed, you know, to a group of people that could handle it. The college students, the men in suits, now they grabbed the movement. And that's how it had to be. I don't understand this animosity sometimes that people are embarrassed that the stormtroopers were drag queens. So what? I mean, they couldn't lead the movement, most of them. You know, they just passed that torch to the next people. We were all involved. Stonewall belongs to everybody. Because I was on a tour, a gay tour of New York City, and they asked me to come with them. And I did a little thing on Stonewall. And the guy who led the tour took us to Julius's and then said that it's the men in suits who are really the ones responsible for this. I didn't even say to the crowd I didn't want to fight with him because it was, you know, his job and I was invited. And they brought me to a brunch. But I wanted to tell him that it was Julius's where they held a bunch of Stonewall queens for the cops and told the cops, see, we're not all like that. I didn't want to ruin his stick, you know.
He had said that the Julius business suit guys were...
Gays were the real Stonewall.
That seems strange.
It was so narrow and Procrustean, you know. He couldn't deal with this idea. There are still these masculinists, you know, who can't deal with this. They should... Is an age of gender bending, they should be able to deal with all this stuff. I mean, it's so stupid.
When was this gay tour?
2 years ago, 3 years ago. I complained only when we had the brunch, I complained to the organizers.
Heading back to that after that evening, the exhaustion, you went home, your dad was cheering you on. Did you go back the next night?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was my hangout. I mean, you know, yeah.
And the riot continued? Or?
Well, some people would like to put it that way. People were coming in to get their shot. You know, they deserved it, you know. The spontaneity was gone. The riot was that first night. That's the Stonewall Riot. And the other things are just protest and people that had to get in on it. And they had the right to, too. They were, you know, pressed. But that first night was the night of dynamite.
There's some water for you.
Oh.
Was the bar open the next night?
I don't think so. We were hanging out in front of it. No, it couldn't have been. No, it wasn't.
How bad did the fire get? Did it?
Wasn't too bad because I was in the Stonewall a week later when they had to open in the afternoon and it didn't look that damaged. But it was such an ugly place, you wouldn't know. With the lights on, it was, you know.
That's funny. What's when you think of Stonewall now and your involvement that evening? What does that mean to you? What does that bring up for you?
Well, it brings up, for me, I'm not sure, but the reaction of people to Stonewall has involved me in, talking about Stonewall and involving myself in helping young students, of the country, or talking about Stonewall wherever I go. But I'm more grateful for that I have something to do, and that I'm able to help. At first, no one ever asked me anything. It was only until that film was made.
Which film?
Oh, The American Experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden, I was on the map of that. But I would have talked at any time, but nobody ever asked me.
Did you feel yourself that Stonewall was the spark that moved things along?
Oh, yes. But I'm not saying it's the only thing because everything was being moved to that point. It was just where was it going to happen? I mean, there were other riots. They were small scale. But gays was talking back. Something had changed even before Stonewall. Something had changed. I mean, I remember once in 67, I think it was, or late 66, about 22 of us, some queen got beat up on Butuga Street, about 2 in the morning. And about 20 queens that were around started putting on makeup and marched over there. There was nobody there. Everything was closed by the time we got there. But they did do it. There was a boy, some terrible kids attacking us on West Street. And of course they did it all with camp. They put a queen in the street so that those boys could see it. And they picked the most obnoxious queen. That's what they wanted. And the queen didn't have a chance even to protest. He said, no man hates you, everybody hates you. And took that queen and put her in the street. And they all hid behind the cars. And the queen was like this. And they went right down the road to get that queen. And boy, they got surprised in their life. No, there was reactions. This wouldn't happen in the 50s. Can you imagine? Those would have got the electric chair. Attacking a decent young man with his life ahead of him because you've ruined yours by being decadent, hedonist pig. It was a terrible battle. First had to be won psychologically.
Very interesting. It's very interesting, the idea that though Stonewall is remembered as the spark that brought gay liberation, it was really kind of the spark that was in wait.
Right.
For a few years there in the 60s because other things were already happening.
And yes, I mean, you had Truman Capote being on TV saying he's a homosexual. You had these early 60s big articles of where gays taking over Broadway and their hatred of women. I remember the most discussed thing when I was 11 years old. The most discussed thing was Tennessee Williams' Suddenly Last Summer. And they didn't have the vocabulary, to discuss this. But all the straight people were discussing it. Everybody was discussing it. What did it mean? Was gays involved in this? Or fags? Were fags involved? Was it a fag movie? Everybody was discussing it. Everybody went to see it because she had that famous bathing suit with the water stretched, and gave her that look. Everybody went to see it.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Oh, the hero.
It's a painful film.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, it's elusive. You know what's happening and you don't know what's happening all at the same time.
Right. And the straight people were confounded, but they thought it was a good movie. But, I listened to everything as a kid. Because, they were training us to be straight people. So I knew I had to take this training. Otherwise, we we were all passing us gay people that were 12, 13, 14. I knew not to lift my finger when I was drinking tea. I saw straight people never did that. But they would catch me occasionally. Like they would say, Boyce, look at your nails. I go, and a man doesn't do that. I mean, gender reigned supreme. But I was thought of odd. So I was very lucky in one way through my mother's pain, because she was an invalid, and since everybody lived in the neighborhood so long, I was given that handicap that my mother was ill, so I was odd, not queer. So they let me know, they discussed everything in front of me, including their hatred of gay people and their duplicitous relationships with women and their cruelty. Not by even individual nature, but by the code of machismo, which they had to live up to. Thank God I didn't.
The cult of machismo. There's like 15 things flying through my head. How are you feeling?
Very good.
Okay. So the second night, it was really, the first night you consider the time of that was the riot. The other was
Protest.
People coming to see where it happened and
Protest. Continue the protest. But it was a protest, not a fight anymore. People was trying to start fights, but not like that. Nothing ignited.
And how many nights did it go total?
A few.
And then what happened after that?
It died down. And it just became a riot. Something we did.
When did you get the sense that it was going to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, when was the sense that you had gone from just a bunch of people to a community? Did it seem to have anything to do with that?
Oh, yes, it had everything to do with that. I mean, because it was igniting a whole movement, you know. But that didn't mean those Stonewall Queens related to that movement. See, that was their problem.
Do you feel that that people of color and trans folks are left out of Stonewall history?
I can't see why or how. Because, you know, we weren't even racial. You know, to be in the Stonewall crowd, you just had to have character. So it was black, white, Latin, didn't matter. One of us was a gypsy. And you were regarded by your character if you could fit in with the crowd. Could you snap quick? Were you clever? You know, did you know the ropes? Things like that. Fun, you know, hip. It wasn't like that. We never discussed race. And Bertie was black Puerto Rican. We never talked about race in that manner. Black queens could be some of the most outrageous, so naturally they were celebrated, because anybody outrageous was celebrated. But a good proportion of the street queens are black. But if people think that the street queens were the entire riot, it's a mistake, because there was 200 people at least in that riot.
And it was everybody.
It was everybody. And in the front with those queens, they had nothing to lose. They had been arrested, they had been beaten, they had been homeless, they had been everything. What did they have to lose? You know. Sometimes the bravest ones were those middle-class queens that really had something to lose and went in.
Interesting.
I mean, I thought, you know, I saw everybody, you know. I was proud to be next to a person who was total gay opposite of me, total. We wouldn't even say hello, I'm sure, if we saw on the street. But there we were. And there was that ancient band of brothers, that ancient Theban thing. It worked. History called. Gays are foolish to think they don't have a history. Oh, I could hear that call.
You could hear that call.
Oh yeah, we were a band of brothers.
You felt your ancestral roots coming to you?
Absolutely, because I studied history always. This was like living it. Because if Bertie got hurt, I couldn't let him get hit alone. You know, it wasn't worth it. And he felt the same way. And seeing Miss New Orleans in that manner, it was like bigger than life, like on a poster, up on the thing, leading everybody. As we needed to see that, we were only seeing this way. And then she had the smartness to get up. Really great. They're unsung heroes. They all died, half of them before AIDS. Half of them were dead. And the other half, AIDS.
You don't know of any of the folks of color or trans who are still alive?
None.
Talk about this.
They were the first to die. But they had very hard lives. We're not talking about queens that were playing, I mean, that was the real thing.
What happened to Birdie?
Bertie died of AIDS. He left the city. He found it too racist. He went to San Francisco. So many died, but mostly drug overdoses, early. Sylvia, not Rivera, the other Sylvia, white Sylvia, jumped off St. George Hotel in Brooklyn. And hippie Sally got so stoned, she was, oh, I'm sorry.
You got it. You good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. She slept on her legs and had to be amputated. She lost circulation.
Who is this?
This hippie Sally, she was a big gay supporter. And the other thing, but we never talk about, is the role of women, in Stonewall. But it wasn't their bar, But they were 100% behind us.
Hippie Sally was her name?
Oh, hippie Sally, yeah, poor hippie Sally. She marched with us. And she was fabulous. She was always stoned. And you say to hippie Sally, what do you want? She goes, everything. And she didn't know what she liked. She would say, do I like that dress? No, you hate that style. Thank you. She said, and she was great, but she loved gay people. I don't know what I never knew what she was. But, lesbians and gays, were the wings of the same bird. I mean, same oppressor,
Do you remember lesbians at the riot?
I didn't know. I know that some were there. They didn't hang. They came to Christopher Street to say hello. There was no bar for them. And they were uncomfortable sometimes in the bars. And, we couldn't go to their bars. Because if we went to their bars would tip to all male. And they wouldn't have a place. So they looked like they were mean to us. They weren't mean to us trying to protect the turf. They just didn't want us in their bars. Because they had so few. And they didn't have parking lots of bathrooms and parks, you know what I mean? But they were our sisters. And I felt 100% they were behind us, 100%. It was a beautiful age for that. And it wasn't that kind of hippie love, This went a little deeper. This wasn't an ideology. This was the heart. It was nice, really nice.